Andre Vasilevsky may be back, but the Tampa Bay Lightning continue to play poorly. We talk about that. Losers of their last two. How can the Lightning get things back on track once again? We talk about all that coming up and more on today's episode of Locked On Lightning.
You're Locked On Lightning, your daily podcast on the Tampa Bay Lightning. Part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
Welcome to another episode of Locked On Lightning, part of the Locked On Podcast Network. I'm your host, Adam Tanker. Thank you for joining us on this episode of Locked On Lightning. Just want to remind you that today's episode is brought to you by Game Time. Download the Game Time app, create an account, and use the code LOCKEDONNHL for $20 off your first purchase. On this episode, we're talking about the last two games. Lightning losers of their last two, playing ever as poorly, or I wouldn't say that. I would say that they are still underachieving. After picking up a big win against the Carolina Hurricanes in Vasilevsky's debut of the season, they go out on a road trip. Looks all promising. You figured that, all right, pick up a big 8-2 win against Carolina, who I think many view, including yours truly, as one of the better teams in the Eastern Conference, coming from a very good division in the Metropolitan. And then you go out west, and I don't think the expectations were very high in terms of I don't think there was a lot of people that went into this road trip. This very short road trip, mind you, to end the month of November, right before the Lightning have their last game of the month against the Pittsburgh Penguins at home tomorrow night. I don't think anybody, including myself, really expected the Lightning to win two in a row. You kind of figured, though, going into this road trip that they would have at least had the Arizona game, and we'll talk about that one as well. But first, before we get into all that, I just want to remind you to subscribe to the pod, give us a follow wherever podcasts are distributed in audio form. You could also follow us on our YouTube page. Go ahead and subscribe to that. The channel is starting to really pick up. Thank you to all of you who have subscribed. And so if you are a daily listener but haven't subscribed to that, please go ahead. It really helps us grow a lot and reach a lot new viewers and listeners as well. So like I said, going into this road trip, I think we could both agree that, okay, Colorado, maybe most likely not. The Lightning weren't going to go in and win that. If anything, if what we saw, and I know this was 2 years ago pretty much, but the Stanley Cup final against Colorado, and it's not just the Lightning, it's just teams in general have a hard time going into Colorado and skating with them. It's high altitude. I know it's a lame excuse, but to some, but it's a real thing. It's just like when baseball teams go in Colorado and they play the Rockies and the ball flies out of the ballpark. It's the same exact thing, kind of. But you kind of figured, all right, going into that one, Nathan McKinnon out. All right, not a big deal. They still lose. All right. You kind of have to go into that game with no expectations. Come out of it. All right, Lightning lose, whatever. At least they didn't get the doors blown off of them. And the silver lining is that, all right, we get to pick it up right back again tomorrow night against the Arizona Coyotes, who on paper are a good team, a team that if they were to make the right moves and actually be able to draw quality free agents, this is a team that we could be talking about in not too long a time, to where they could be a playoff team, a yearly playoff team. And but that's not the case. And the Arizona Coyotes are a team that are really at the bottom of the barrel almost every year in the Western Conference. They're really not in that bad a shape right now. I mean, it's still also we're in month 2 of the season, so you can't really judge a team that much, especially on paper when you haven't seen them at all this year. Um, Coyotes were, as of now, after this game, are in 9th place out of 16 teams in the conference. So take that as you will. I mean, the teams below them, except for probably the Kraken and the Oilers, are teams that are not very good. So do with that information as you will. But I am extra annoyed by this loss, and I am annoyed by every loss, as every Lightning fan should. And the reason is because, and maybe this is part of me just constantly liking to trash the Coyotes and never believe in them actually being a legitimate good hockey team, is you got to look at the roster. And I spoke about this at the beginning of the year. Excuse me, not the roster, the schedule. You got to look at the schedule, and everybody does it, and I'm sure the players on the team do it to a certain degree. They look at the schedule and they say, all right, these games, X amount of games are toss-ups, whether it be Colorado, whether it be this upcoming game against the Penguins, Carolina, Edmonton. Out of those 4 teams, I think I just listed, Lightning should have won half of those, or should, once the month comes to an end. And then you look at games like Columbus, like Arizona. You look at the schedule and you look at those teams, whether it's home, away, at a neutral site, I don't care. And maybe one can make the case for at least one of those Blackhawk games, and certainly St. Louis. Those are games you should win. Should. Regardless who's in that. I don't care if it's Matt Tompkins. I don't care if it's Jonas Johansson. And I know it. And I certainly don't care if it's Andrei Vasilevsky. The Lightning should win those games. There's absolutely no reason. And I'm glad that Andrei Vasilevsky, and I know he's only been back for 2 games, and he's 1-1, and a lot of hockey left for him to play. So I'm not going to make any judgment just yet on how I feel about him. Because like I said in the last pod, it's going to take a month or 2 for him to really get in the swing of things. But there's really no excuse, especially now. I mean, going forward, with all the Jonas Johansson hate that I have seen from some of the fans on this, from this fan base, which is absolutely ridiculous, because I think the guy, all things considered, has played his butt off in front of, at times, this trash defense and coverage that we have seen in front of him. There's really no reason why we look back on the Lightning, and yes, they are on paper significantly getting better, but this team is playing way low the standards that should be set for them, regardless of who has been playing and who hasn't been around. 4-2-3 in the month of October. Okay, getting off to a rough start. I'll look past it. This Lightning team kind of trying to figure out who they are outside of Andrei Vasilevsky. Okay. A little bit more games this month in November. 14 games played. 6-6-2. 6-6-2. Just in case you didn't hear the first time. And they're being outscored 53-48. And yes, on paper in the last month, 4-2-3 doesn't look as good as 6-6-2. But when you're allowing 53 goals, and not all of those 53 goals were on Tompkins or Johansson. Yes, there was a very small number of that can be attributed to Andre Vasilevsky. But really what it comes down to is that this team is just almost at times refusing, and I've spoken about this many times before with this Tampa Bay Lightning team. But what it comes down to is that this team somewhat almost at times just refuses to play consistently. It's almost like they're going to get bored with doing the right thing or just coming out and carrying any momentum. And I know I'm being a little bit dramatic with that, but like I've warned everybody from the beginning of the season, when it comes down to it, is that nobody is going to be able to get this team going other than these skaters. Okay. 88 can only make so many saves in net. You know, I fully expect us to see, as soon as he gives us a sliver of dominance at Vasilevsky, for this team to completely pack it in, and he's going to have to stand on his head and save 45 plus shots, because that's what we've seen out of this team. And I really want to, and I'm going to end it here, and then we'll move on and talk about how the Lightning could really get things going, and how it's really important for them to end this season. I mean, the month of November on a good note, because December, like any month in the NHL season, does not get any easier. I really want to see a pissed off John Cooper one of these days, because we have not seen that. We've seen him critical. I know that he is typically not a coach who's one to call out his players, and that's fine. But I'm tired of the same excuse. I'm tired of saying, "Oh, we missed opportunities." No, you know what? What the end of it? Because I'm trying to keep it friendly. You know the end of that sentence, and I think that it's very much warranted. I mean, I have no idea, and we have no idea what is being said in the locker room. He could be completely losing it between periods, but I think, sort of to a certain extent, we will hear. We should, at least, and it would be beneficial for this team to kind of be put on blast in the public eye. And I'm not saying he has to go one by one down the pecking order and tell every player that they're terrible and worthless. Absolutely not. But at the same time, I think that 6-6-2, coming back from 4-3-2, I believe what was the stat? 4-2-3, excuse me, last month. It's not really much of an improvement. So let me know in the comments below what you think, because I mean, like I said, it doesn't get any easier. It now all eyes are on Andre Vasilevsky. I don't think it's right for him to kind of have this team and this fan base kind of being like, all right, like, now is when we get going because we have him. No, that's not how it works. Like, other players need to step up. Like, Kucherov has been playing out of his mind. That's phenomenal. I love it. Stamkos has been playing incredible. Love it. Love to see it more. Cole Kiepke, I've been seeing, a little bit, shout out to him, ever since he's been getting more playing time and got brought up. I think he's been really everything that we kind of hoped for him to be, to some degree. But you can't have games when Tyler Mott, who, if you followed him the last couple of years, especially last year with the Rangers, he needs to play a bigger role, and he can't go games where he's not shotless. So, and it's not just him; it's the kind of the missing man himself, Hayden Fleury, and then everyone's favorite defenseman, Nick Perbix. I mean, there's a lot of things that we could get into on this episode, but obviously there isn't enough time. But everybody needs to get involved. That's really what it comes down to. So we'll talk more about that coming up in the next segment. But first, I'm going to talk about our first sponsor of the day, and that is our friends over at eBay Motors. Now, passion, drive, and patience. Not only is that what it takes to be a Lightning fan, but that's what it takes to bring home the winning trophy. And that's what also keeps your ride or die alive. eBay Motors has everything you need to maintain your vehicle, level it up to peak performance, from superchargers, roof racks, exhaust kits, LED headlights, and more. Whether you're into speed, power, or style, eBay Motors has got you covered. With over 122 million parts for your number one ride or die, you'll always find exactly what you're looking for. And with eBay Guaranteed Fit, your part is guaranteed to fit to your ride every time, or your money back, because with eBay Motors, you're burning rubber, not cash. So with all the parts you need at the prices you want, it's easy to turn your car into the MVP and bring it home that win. Keep your ride or die alive at ebaymotors.com. Eligible items only. Exclusions apply. eBay Guaranteed Fit, only available to U.S. customers. So as always, I want to thank everybody for making us your first listen of the day. And if you haven't already done so, please go ahead and subscribe to the podcast. Give us a follow wherever podcasts are distributed in audio form. We're also available on YouTube. You can follow us on social media at LO_Lightning on Twitter, as well as LOCKEDON_Lightning on Instagram. If you want to get in touch with me or the show, you could comment below this video right here for a question that could be answered on the next episode, or just a comment. Or you could reach out to me on Twitter at DankyDang, DENKY, D8NK. You could tweet to me or message me on the side, whatever you're feeling more comfortable doing. And I'm not going to get too much. Well, I'm not going to. I didn't get too much into the two previous losses, because I mean, they could be easily summed up missed chances. And that's just really what it comes down to, is that this team just continuously misses out on chances, whether it be on special teams or off turnovers or whatever the case may be. This team does not execute consistently. They do not come out and with the goal of performing in clutch moments, whether it's subconsciously or consciously. I'm going to take subconsciously is probably the more likely answer. And I think that when it comes down to it, and it's going to be very vital coming in the next upcoming game, last game in November, actually, where the Lightning will be back home, thank goodness, against the Penguins, who got off to a little bit of an abysmal start to start the season. They're still, they're 500. They're back to 500 now, which I'm sure Penguin fans are happy about. But this is a team that I don't care where they're at in the standings. I mean, you could also attribute that also to their division being probably the best in the whole league. And I know some Lightning fans might think that the Atlantic is, but I mean, if you don't believe me, look at that division. look at the teams, look at their records, and tell me otherwise. But when you have that core of Letang, Malkin, Crosby, you can never count them out. And that's how I feel about this Penguins team going into tomorrow's game. And the Lightning, really the key for that is that you need to get everybody involved early on. And that was what was so great about the win against Carolina, because you had your big guns going out there and scoring goals. Point, Cooch, Stamkos, Glendening, who I'm curious to know how many Lightning fans really knew his name, really his first name, before he scored that goal the other night. And I think that's really where the Lightning's weakness and their strength come into play, is because they're kind of doing themselves a disfavor by not trying to do things to get those guys going. I feel this team potentially could be more successful when your game plan is trying to distribute the minutes early on in the first two periods evenly between the first and fourth lines. And I'm talking about second, third, fourth, evenly, having all those lines play equal minutes. Other than obviously special teams, really the focus there is 5-on-5 even strength. But And that's why you went out and got Tyler Mott, who, like I previously said, I think he's a very talented player. I think he is a player that really brings a lot to the table. When you look at his body of work, what he has done over the last couple of years, kind of just going back and forth out of New York. I've had the pleasure of seeing him work, um, because he's played on the Rangers like a billion times. I think that, when you look at his stats, and I'm just going to list out some stats from the last couple of years for him. Um, in 22-23, played 62 games. He scored, yes, 8 goals and he had 19 points. But at the same time, the guy was everywhere on the ice. Whereas this year, there's games where I think we could agree to a certain extent, you hardly notice him. And that's obviously a problem, for a guy like that. If it was somebody that came down from Syracuse, if it was kind of like a Cole Kiepke guy who still very much has a lot to prove, but has shown flashes of what he can do in certain situations, that's one thing. But at the same time, this is a guy you paid money. Like, you're not paying him an entry level contract or, whatever the case, chump money. You're paying him a decent amount. Okay. So it's very important to the game plan. I'm not saying let's center the offensive motivation or game plan or whatever you want to call it around Tyler Mott, but John Cooper, I think, to a certain extent, may need to turn things around, or maybe give some of these guys a little bit extra minutes down the stretch. And I know that sounds a little bit controversial because then obviously you're taking away minutes from somebody else in the higher up lines, possibly, but something's got to give, especially when you look at the splits with the Lightning. When, for example, unless everything's going right for this team, they are it kind of very much falls apart very soon. And we could kind of all agree that if the Lightning don't get off to almost a picture perfect start or something close to it or answer back right away, the game is kind of lost from there. Going into the second period when they're trailing, they're 3-7-3. Going into the third when they're trailing, they're 1-7-2. And to kind of reverse that, to show you that when everything is going right for them, everything basically has to go right for them in order to win. They're 5-0-2 and they're winning going into the second period, and they're 8-1-2 going into the third, which basically tells you that when this team is kicked into the grave and they got at least one shovel's worth of dirt on them, they're ready to lie down and close their eyes. And it only gets worse from there. And that's where guys like Tyler Mott, like Cole Kiepke, need to come out. Luke Glendening, those guys need to come out, body swinging, kind of just wreaking havoc. Things that we have seen past Lightning team depth players do so well that got them back into the series last year against the Toronto Maple Leafs and almost forced it to a game 7. Got them to 3 straight Stanley Cup finals, gave them 2 straight Stanley Cup championships. Okay. So at least we have the body of work that has shown that it's worked there before, that is effective. It just needs to be implemented, which I don't think it is. I think that John Cooper, especially when things are going wrong, heavily relies or looks way too much to his top 2 lines to get things going. Where, if that's the case, don't play 4 lines, which obviously is suicide. But am I making sense here? Because I really think that it's gotten to a point with the Tampa Bay Lightning and with John Cooper that it almost feels like we're complicating things. And they try to get too cute after they win games, such as like the one they did against Boston. like they did against Carolina. And that's kind of what leads you to these losses against teams that you really should be beating. Like the Columbus Blue Jackets, like previously the Arizona Coyotes. Because it doesn't make sense how you go from dropping 8 goals on one of the best teams in the Eastern Conference. And I get it, it's kind of hard to compare Colorado and Carolina, but I mean, it shouldn't be that big of a drop off. It's not like Colorado is that all powerful team that they were when they won the cup. So it goes back to our favorite word here on the podcast, and that's consistency. So we'll wrap things up, talk about, because I basically just gave you the game plan of what needs to happen tomorrow night, or your expectations, really the list of what should be seen in tomorrow night's game. We'll wrap things up with our closing thoughts on the month of November. And yeah, let's just cross our fingers and hope for a Lightning win tomorrow night. And obviously we'll be back tomorrow night to kind of preview that game. So make sure to tune in for that. So we'll wrap things up in just a little bit. But first, I want to talk about our last sponsor of the day. And that is our friends over at the Game Time app. Now, it's that time of year. You want to go out with your friends, sporting events, comedy shows, live shows, whether it's musicals or whatever. You want to get tickets. And sometimes, and you don't want to break the bank, obviously. You're buying people gifts, and you don't want to break the bank. Okay? Neither do I. And that's why I go and rely heavily on our friends over at Game Time. Now, my favorite thing about it is that I like to buy tickets last minute. My friends and I like to make plans last minute, and there shouldn't be any hassle once I pay that fee that my tickets are delivered to me right away. And not only that, if I'm relying on them so much and it's great and it's an easy to use app, shouldn't I get some deals? Well, guess what? You can find all that at Game Time with their killer last minute deals, all in prices and views from your seat, and their best price guarantee. Game Time takes the guesswork out of buying tickets. They got last minute tickets, flash deals, zone deals, easy to find and buy tickets for every kind of event in your area, views from all seats in the venue, lowest price guarantee, event cancellation protection, job loss protection, etc. Download the Game Time app, create an account, and use the code LOCKEDONNHL for $20 off your first purchase. Terms apply. Again, create an account, redeem the code LOCKEDONNHL for $20 off. Download the Game Time app today. Last minute tickets, lowest price guaranteed. So wrapping things up on the show, as always, thank you for making us your first listen of the day. And yeah, reach out. I want to hear some of your comments, some of your feelings. I'm trying to be positive. I'm not trying to kill this team. I understand it's the first 2 months of the season. And I kind of overlooked October because I get it. Like I said at the top of the show, this team was trying to find their identity without Vasilevsky. And I get it. But at the same time, I feel like this team, for the most part, except for that fourth line, they kind of know who they are. It's not like a couple of years ago, kind of where you saw a little bit, some new phases. And I think it's about time. I kind of felt like this team was finally got it together because we saw how well they played against Boston. And then a little bit of a hiccup against Winnipeg. That's fine. And then you go into that game and you blow the Hurricanes out of their own building. Like I said, second best team in the Metropolitan Division, one of the better teams in the Eastern Conference. And then you follow that up with mediocre back to square one performances against Carolina and Arizona. And I just think that we're at this point in the season, it's inexcusable. I just feel like this team is just going around in circles, and the time for that to stop has way passed. I think the excuses, there's really none at this point. We got to the point that everybody was waiting for, and that was Andrei Vasilevsky's debut. And like I said, it's only 2 games, but looking back on the month of November, if I had to grade this one, I would say a C, because we saw some good things. We saw flashes of what this team could potentially be. But at the same time, it's the inconsistencies. It's just this team has good players. We know that, and they've showed moments of clutch work and clutch goals and clutch play and all of that. But it never comes together at the same time, and that's the problem. And I'm not saying that needs to happen on a nightly basis, and I'm not saying that the Lightning need to win every game. No, but you got to do better than 6-6-2 and 4-2-3 or 4-3-2, whatever their record was for October. But you got to do better than that, because, like I said, the month of November, I mean, just November, yeah, is ending, but December doesn't get any easier, because pull out a big win against Pittsburgh. You got Dallas on Saturday, and not only that, you got Dallas in back-to-back games, one away and one home. And then you're right back at home for Pittsburgh again. And Nashville, who we all know is a scrappy team. Seattle, another scrappy team. Vancouver, who a lot of people think is a cup contender now. I will leave that determination up to when we actually see them hit the ice. And then you got Edmonton, Calgary. That's a game that I think we should all agree. I'm going to say it right now that they should win that game. No excuses. And then St. Louis, that's another game that should be won. And then you got a bunch of tough ones to end the year. Vegas, Washington, the Panthers, the Rangers, and Montreal. Montreal's, they got some bite, as we all know. So it doesn't get any easier, and it's not going to at any point. And the only way it can somewhat feel easier is if the Lightning go out there and play the right way. So we'll be back tomorrow to preview the game against the Pittsburgh Penguins. And like I said, Lightning need to win this, because and they need to start stringing together some wins. I truly believe that they could win at least one out of the 2 against Dallas. Dallas is a good team, but still, I still firmly believe that the Lightning could go toe-to-toe with any team in this league, as long as they go out there and play the right way, especially now that Andrei Vasilevsky's back in net. So, yeah, join us tomorrow. We'll preview tomorrow night's game against the Penguins and be hoping for a win. So, in the meantime, that's been it for this episode of Locked On Lightning, part of the Locked On Podcast Network. I'm your host, Adam Danker. I'll talk to you in the next one.